The city of Fairview was a place of contrasts. On one side lay the bustling neighborhoods where the sounds of laughter, chatter, and everyday hustle filled the air. These streets were alive with life, despite their modest means. In Westward Heights, a tight-knit community with aging homes and patched roofs, people made the most of what they had. Children played with makeshift toys, their laughter echoing through narrow alleyways, while adults greeted each other with warmth and familiarity. The aroma of freshly cooked meals wafted from kitchen windows, mingling with the faint scent of rain-soaked earth. Amidst the hum of activity stood a small, weathered house on the corner of Rosewood Lane. The paint was chipped, and the front gate leaned slightly to one side, but it was a home brimming with love and resilience. Inside, Daniel, a 14-year-old boy with a bright smile and a determined gaze, was already awake, helping his mother, Maria, prepare breakfast for the day. His younger sister, Maya, hummed to herself as she played with her worn doll at the table. Daniel was a familiar face in the neighborhood, known for his resourcefulness and kind heart. Whether it was helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, tutoring the younger kids after school, or fixing a leaky faucet, Daniel never hesitated to step up. Despite the challenges his family faced, he approached life with a quiet strength, determined to create a better future for himself and his loved ones. Maria, a seamstress, worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Her hands bore the calluses of long hours spent stitching clothes, but her eyes sparkled with pride whenever she looked at her children. "Remember, Daniel," she often said, "it's not what you have, but what you give that makes a difference." Daniel lived by those words. Though the family's financial struggles were an ever-present reality, he found joy in the little things, helping others, dreaming of building something better, and making his mother smile. At night, after finishing his homework, Daniel would sit by the flickering light of a candle, sketching ideas in a tattered notebook. He dreamed of becoming an architect, of designing homes that were not just buildings, but places of warmth and safety. Miles away, in a world of stark contrast, lay the Belmont estate, perched on a hill overlooking the city. The estate was a sprawling marvel of luxury, its iron gates opening to a long driveway lined with sycamore trees. At the end of the driveway stood a mansion with gleaming marble walls, tall arched windows, and fountains that sparkled in the sunlight. The perfectly manicured gardens were adorned with exotic flowers, and the air carried the faint scent of lavender. This estate was the home of Marcus Belmont, a self-made millionaire whose name was synonymous with success. Marcus was a man who thrived on ambition, his days consumed by high-stakes meetings and the relentless pursuit of wealth. While he was respected and even admired in business circles, those who worked closely with him often described him as distant, a man who valued results over relationships. For all his wealth and accomplishments, Marcus's world revolved around his 10-year-old son, Ethan. Since the passing of Ethan's mother several years earlier, Marcus had devoted himself to ensuring his son had everything he could ever need. Ethan's days were filled with private tutors, horseback riding lessons, and a room filled with the latest toys and gadgets. Yet, despite his privileged life, Ethan often felt lonely. The Belmont mansion, for all its grandeur, could feel cold and isolating. His father, though loving in his way, was often preoccupied, leaving Ethan to find solace in his books, games, and the company of the staff. Ethan was a curious and adventurous child, with a streak of independence that often led him to push boundaries. He would sneak glimpses of the city beyond the estate gates, wondering what life was like outside the pristine bubble of his world. To him, the neighborhoods below, though vastly different from his own, seemed alive with a vibrancy he longed to experience. One rainy afternoon, Ethan sat by his bedroom window, watching the droplets streak down the glass as the city below buzzed with activity. He could see the faint outlines of rooftops and streets, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. His imagination ran wild, wondering about the lives of the people who lived there. Little did he know, his curiosity would soon lead him into an adventure that would change his life forever. As the scene shifts back to Hillside Heights, Daniel is seen walking through the neighborhood, stopping to help a neighbor fix a broken fence. The chatter of the community and the warmth of its people envelop him like a second home. His humble surroundings are a stark contrast to the isolated luxury of Belmont Estate, yet there is a richness in the connections and spirit of the people around him. At the Belmont mansion, Marcus finishes a call in his opulent office, glancing at a photo of Ethan on his desk. He sighs, reminding himself to spend more time with his son, though the demands of his empire often pull him away. Meanwhile, Ethan, feeling the pull of adventure, begins to hatch a plan to explore the city he has only ever seen from a distance. The stage is set for two worlds to collide, brought together by an act of courage and kindness that will bridge the gap between privilege and humility. Daniel's resourcefulness and Ethan's curiosity are about to intertwine in ways neither could have anticipated. Daniel's life was a tapestry woven with threads of hardship and hope. His days began before dawn, long before most of the neighborhood stirred. Each morning, Daniel would quietly slip out of bed, careful not to wake his younger sister, Maya, who slept soundly on the small cot they shared. The room they called theirs was modest, its cracked walls adorned with faded posters and drawings Maya had made. Daniel's side of the room was lined with old books and a single notebook filled with sketches and ideas, a glimpse into his dreams of becoming an architect. In the kitchen, Maria, Daniel's mother, was always the first to greet him. She was a seamstress, a woman of quiet strength whose hands bore the marks of years spent stitching and mending clothes for the people of Hillside Heights. Despite the hardships they faced, Maria was a beacon of warmth and encouragement for her children. Her days were long, and her nights often longer, but she never let exhaustion dim the light of her love for Daniel and Maya. "Good morning, mihijo," Maria would say, her voice soft but steady. "You've got a full day ahead, don't you?" Daniel nodded, wolfing down a piece of toast before preparing to head out. His schedule was packed, helping neighbors, running errands, and sometimes taking on odd jobs that earned a few extra coins for the family. Yet, no matter how busy he was, Daniel always carried himself with quiet determination and a ready smile. The people of Hillside Heights often described Daniel as an old soul in a young boy's body. He had a natural ability to see beyond his own struggles, always looking for ways to make life a little brighter for those around him. Whether it was helping Mrs. Rivera carry her heavy bags of produce from the market or fixing Mr. Ogawa's broken fence, Daniel approached every task with care and humility. He never asked for anything in return, believing that kindness was its own reward. At school, Daniel was known for his sharp mind and quiet demeanor. His teachers admired his dedication to learning, though they often worried about the toll his responsibilities at home took on him. Despite the weight he carried, Daniel excelled in his studies, especially in math and art. He had a particular fascination with geometry and design, often spending hours sketching buildings and imagining structures that could one day transform his neighborhood. His dream of becoming an architect was more than just a fantasy. To Daniel, it was a promise, to himself, to his family, and to the community that had shaped him. He envisioned designing homes that were not just shelters, but symbols of hope and dignity. In his tattered notebook, he had pages filled with sketches of houses, schools, and parks that reflected the spirit of Hillside Heights. But dreams alone couldn't shield Daniel from the realities of his life. There were days when the weight of his family's struggles felt almost unbearable. The sound of rain leaking through their roof, the sight of his mother's tired hands, and the empty pantry shelves served as constant reminders of how fragile their existence was. Yet, Daniel never let despair take root. Instead, he channeled his frustration into action, finding strength in the belief that better days lay ahead. Across town, perched on a lush hill that seemed worlds apart from Hillside Heights, stood the Belmont Estate. The estate was a sprawling masterpiece of wealth and grandeur. Its towering gates opened to a driveway lined with ancient sycamore trees, leading to a mansion that gleamed like a marble fortress. Inside, every corner of the Belmont mansion spoke of affluence: crystal chandeliers, polished hardwood floors, and walls adorned with art worth more than most people's yearly income. This was the world of Marcus Belmont, a man whose name was synonymous with success. Marcus was a self-made millionaire who had risen from humble beginnings to become a titan in real estate and technology. His days were meticulously planned, filled with high-stakes meetings, negotiations, and calls that often lasted late into the night. To many, Marcus was the embodiment of the American dream, a man who had built an empire through grit, intelligence, and an unrelenting drive. But for all his success, Marcus's life often felt hollow. Since the death of his wife, Elizabeth, 5 years earlier, he had poured himself into his work, using it as both a distraction and a means of providing for his son, Ethan. Elizabeth's loss had left a void that no amount of wealth or accomplishment could fill, and Marcus struggled to navigate life as a single father. Ethan, at 10 years old, was the heart of Marcus's world. The boy had his mother's soft features and curious spirit, traits that Marcus adored. Determined to give Ethan every possible advantage, Marcus had spared no expense in creating a life of luxury for him. Ethan's room was a wonderland of toys, gadgets, and books, and his schedule was filled with private lessons in everything from piano to horseback riding. Yet, despite his privileged life, Ethan often felt lonely. The Belmont mansion, with all its splendor, could feel cold and isolating. Marcus, though deeply loving, struggled to find the time to connect with his son on a personal level. Their conversations often revolved around school achievements or future plans, leaving little room for the warmth and spontaneity Ethan craved. Ethan was a curious and adventurous child, always looking for ways to break free from the carefully curated world his father had built for him. He would often peer through the estate's gates, watching the city below with a sense of longing. To him, the neighborhoods beyond the hill seemed alive with the kind of freedom and connection he rarely experienced. Ethan dreamed of exploring those streets, of making friends who didn't care about his last name or the size of his house. On rare occasions, Ethan would find ways to slip past the watchful eyes of the estate's security team. He would wander into the nearby town, marveling at the bustling markets, the lively chatter of families, and the carefree laughter of children playing in the streets. These brief escapes were thrilling, but they also left him yearning for more. For Marcus, Ethan's adventures were a source of both frustration and concern. He wanted to protect his son from the dangers of the world, but he also knew that he couldn't shield him forever. Deep down, Marcus envied Ethan's curiosity and spirit. It reminded him of a time when he, too, had dared to dream beyond the confines of his circumstances. Though their lives were separated by miles and marked by stark differences, Daniel and Ethan shared an unspoken connection. Both boys were driven by dreams and a desire for something greater, though their paths to those dreams were vastly different. Daniel's world was one of struggle and resilience, while Ethan's was one of privilege and longing. Yet their hearts were bound by a common thread, the belief that there was more to life than what met the eye. As Daniel worked tirelessly to support his family and pursue his aspirations, Ethan continued to push the boundaries of his world, eager to experience life beyond the gates of Belmont Estate. Their worlds were on a collision course, set to intersect in a way that would forever change both their lives. The sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays over the city as Ethan stood at the grand gates of Belmont Estate, peering out at the bustling world beyond. His father was engrossed in another marathon of business calls, and the staff, assuming Ethan was occupied with his books or toys, paid him little attention. Ethan's curiosity burned brighter than ever. The call of adventure, of exploring the streets he had only glimpsed from afar, was too strong to resist. After ensuring no one was watching, Ethan slipped through a side gate. His heart raced with a mix of excitement and nervousness as his feet carried him down the hill and into the city below. For the first time, he was free from the boundaries of Belmont Estate, free to wander and experience life outside the carefully curated world his father had built for him. The streets were alive with activity. Vendors shouted to passers-by, advertising their wares. The aroma of street food wafted through the air, mingling with the sound of laughter and music. Ethan wandered through the vibrant chaos, wide-eyed and exhilarated. He marveled at the children playing in the streets, their games improvised yet full of joy. For the first time, he felt like he was part of something real, something alive. But as Ethan ventured further, the lively streets gave way to quieter, narrower alleys. The buildings here were more run down, the shadows longer and more imposing. Ethan's excitement began to wane, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. He clutched the small toy car he had brought with him, a gift from his father, as his eyes darted around in search of a familiar landmark. Turning a corner, Ethan suddenly found himself face to face with two older boys leaning casually against a wall. Their clothes were tattered, and their expressions were sharp and calculating. One of them, tall and wiry, grinned as he spotted Ethan. "Well, what do we have here?" he drawled, stepping closer. Ethan took a step back, clutching his toy car tightly. I'm trying to get home," he said, his voice trembling. The other boy, stocky and broad-shouldered, smirked. "Looks like a little rich kid got lost. What's that you're holding? Let me see." Ethan shook his head, his heart pounding. "It's mine." The taller boy chuckled darkly. "Come on, we just want to look. No need to be selfish." Before Ethan could react, the stocky boy lunged forward, grabbing for the toy car. Ethan stumbled back, his grip tightening as he tried to pull away. The taller boy stepped in, blocking Ethan's escape. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Hey!" a voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a knife. The two boys turned to see Daniel standing at the entrance of the alley. His arms were crossed, and his expression was calm but firm. Despite his smaller stature, there was a quiet authority in his stance that made the older boys pause. "What do you want?" the taller boy demanded, his tone laced with irritation. Daniel took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "Leave him alone. He's just a kid." The stocky boy sneered. "What's it to you?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I said leave him alone." For a moment, the two older boys seemed to weigh their options. Finally, the taller one muttered a curse under his breath. "Whatever. Let's go." With one last glare at Ethan, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Ethan stood frozen, his heart racing as he stared at Daniel. "Thank you," he stammered. Daniel smiled, his expression softening. "No problem. Are you okay?" Ethan nodded shakily, still clutching his toy car. I got lost. I don't know how to get back home." Daniel's gaze softened with understanding. "Where do you live?" Ethan hesitated, unsure if he should reveal the truth. "Up on the hill," he said finally, pointing in the direction of Belmont Estate. Daniel's eyebrows rose in recognition. He had heard of the estate. It was the stuff of local legend, but he had never imagined meeting someone who lived there. "All right," he said. "Let's get you home." As they walked back toward the main streets, Daniel kept Ethan talking to distract him from his fear. "What's your name?" Daniel asked. "Ethan," the boy replied. "What's yours?" "Daniel." Ethan glanced at Daniel, his curiosity piqued. "Do you live around here?" Daniel nodded. "Just a few blocks away." "What about you? What were you doing so far from home?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "I just wanted to see what it was like out here. My dad doesn't let me leave the estate." Daniel chuckled softly. "Wow, you picked an interesting way to explore." Ethan smiled for the first time since the encounter in the alley. "Thanks for helping me," he said earnestly. "Don't mention it," Daniel replied. "Everyone needs help sometimes." As they approached the hill leading to Belmont Estate, the streets became busier, filled with cars and well-dressed pedestrians. Ethan's mood lifted as he recognized the familiar gates of his home. A security guard spotted him and rushed over, his expression a mix of relief and alarm. "Master Ethan, where have you been? We've been looking everywhere for you," the guard exclaimed, his voice tinged with both worry and reprimand. Ethan turned to Daniel, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you for helping me," he said, his voice sincere. Daniel shrugged modestly. "Take care of yourself, okay?" Without waiting for a reply, Daniel turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Ethan watched him go, feeling an odd pang of loss for someone he had only just met. Later that evening, Ethan recounted his adventure to his father over dinner. Marcus, who had been preoccupied with his phone, set it down as soon as he heard the words "lost" and "helped." His brow furrowed with concern as Ethan described the encounter in the alley and how Daniel had stepped in to protect him. "And he didn't ask for anything?" Marcus asked, his voice incredulous. Ethan shook his head. He just walked me home." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He was a man used to dealing with transactions, with actions motivated by gain or profit. The idea of a complete stranger helping his son without expecting anything in return was both humbling and unsettling. He decided he needed to meet this boy himself. The stage was set for a life-changing connection, one born out of courage, kindness, and a willingness to protect another. Daniel had risked himself to save Ethan, and though he walked away expecting nothing, the impact of his actions would ripple far beyond that fateful day. After dinner, Ethan sat curled up on the oversized couch in the Belmont Mansion's living room, recounting every detail of his adventure to his father, Marcus Belmont. Marcus listened intently, his initial frustration over Ethan's disobedience giving way to shock and gratitude as the story unfolded. So, this boy, Daniel, just stepped in and stood up to those kids? Marcus asked, his tone laced with disbelief. Ethan nodded. He didn't even hesitate. He made them leave, and then he walked me all the way back here. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The thought of what could have happened to Ethan filled him with dread. But the idea that a complete stranger, a boy not much older than Ethan, had risked himself to ensure his son's safety left Marcus deeply moved. "Do you know where he lives?" Marcus asked, his voice softening. Ethan thought for a moment. "I think he said he lives near where we were. I can show you." The next morning, Marcus acted decisively. He instructed his driver to prepare the car, ensuring that Ethan joined him. The Belmont household was abuzz with whispers as the typically composed and aloof Marcus hurried out the door, his demeanor unusually animated. As the sleek black car rolled into Hillside Heights, the contrast between the opulent vehicle and the modest neighborhood couldn't have been starker. Children playing in the streets paused to stare, their games momentarily forgotten. Adults peered out from windows and doorways, their faces etched with curiosity and apprehension. The sight of a luxury car in their neighborhood was rare, and the question on everyone's mind was the same. Who could it be? Inside the car, Ethan pressed his face to the window, scanning the streets for any sign of Daniel. "This is the way," he said, pointing toward the house on Rosewood Lane. Daniel was in the front yard, fixing a creaky gate for their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rivera, when the car came into view. He squinted against the sunlight, curious but cautious, as the vehicle slowed to a stop. The polished exterior and tinted windows were a stark contrast to the rusted cars and bicycles that lined the street. The driver stepped out first, opening the rear door with a flourish. Marcus emerged, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the humble surroundings. Ethan followed close behind, clutching a small gift bag in his hands. Daniel straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans as he watched the two approach. His brow furrowed in confusion, but he remained composed, his natural politeness taking over. "Daniel?" Marcus said, his deep voice carrying both authority and warmth. Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" Marcus extended a hand, his expression earnest. "I'm Marcus Belmont, Ethan's father. I believe you helped him yesterday." The name Belmont was not unfamiliar to Daniel, but hearing it, spoken aloud, paired with the imposing presence of the man before him, made his stomach flip. Still, he shook Marcus's hand firmly, meeting his gaze with quiet confidence. "It was no trouble," Daniel said. "I just did what anyone would have done." "Not everyone would," Marcus replied, his tone filled with conviction. "What you did took courage, and I can't thank you enough for protecting my son." By now, Maria had stepped out onto the porch, her sewing forgotten. Maya peeked out from behind her, wide-eyed and curious. The sight of the millionaire and his son at their doorstep was surreal, and Maria's hands fidgeted nervously as she tried to process the moment. "Good morning," Marcus said, turning his attention to Maria. "You must be Daniel's mother." Maria nodded, her voice tinged with apprehension. "Yes, I am. Is everything all right?" Marcus smiled reassuringly. "More than all right, ma'am. Your son saved my boy yesterday, and I wanted to thank him personally." Maria's eyes flickered to Daniel, her expression a mix of pride and confusion. "Daniel didn't mention anything," she said softly. Daniel shrugged, his voice humble. "It wasn't a big deal, Ma. I just helped him get home." "It was a very big deal," Marcus interjected. He turned to Ethan, who stepped forward and held out the gift bag. "This is for you," Ethan said shyly, "to say thank you." Daniel hesitated, glancing at his mother for guidance before accepting the bag. Inside was a small but intricately designed model house, a clear nod to Daniel's love of architecture. His eyes widened as he examined the thoughtful gift, his fingers tracing the delicate details. "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is really nice." "That's not all," Marcus said. He gestured toward the car, and his driver retrieved a large envelope, handing it to Marcus. "This is for your family," Marcus continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Inside are the property papers to a new home. I want you to have a safe and comfortable place to live." Maria's breath caught, her hands trembling as she accepted the envelope. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the contents before darting back to Marcus. I don't understand," she said, her voice shaky. "Why would you do this?" Marcus's expression softened. "Because your son saved my world yesterday. No amount of money can repay that. But I want to give you something that can make a difference for your family." The words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. Maria looked at Daniel, who seemed equally stunned. "We can't accept this," Maria said finally, her voice breaking. "It's too much." "It's not too much," Marcus insisted gently. "It's the least I can do. Please, let me do this for you." Daniel, still holding the model house, looked at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." As the exchange unfolded, neighbors began to gather at a respectful distance, their curiosity impossible to contain. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they pieced together the story, their awe growing with each revelation. The sight of the imposing millionaire standing humbly before Daniel's family was a moment none of them would forget. Marcus, aware of the attention but unfazed, extended a final gesture of gratitude. "Daniel, if you ever need anything, school, work, anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. You have my word." With that, Marcus and Ethan returned to their car, leaving Daniel and his family standing in stunned silence. The envelope in Maria's hands felt heavier than anything she had ever carried, its contents a symbol of hope and a brighter future. The morning after the surprise visit from Marcus Belmont, the air in Hillside Heights buzzed with a mix of disbelief and excitement. The sight of the sleek black car in their humble neighborhood had become the talk of the town, and the details of the Belmont family's extraordinary gesture were already spreading like wildfire. But inside the small home on Rosewood Lane, Daniel and his family were still processing the gravity of what had happened. The envelope containing the property papers sat on the dining table, untouched. Maria, who had barely slept, stared at it as though it were a mirage. Daniel sat beside her, his usually composed demeanor tinged with uncertainty. Maya, too young to grasp the full weight of the situation, hummed to herself as she played with the toy car Daniel had gifted her years ago. "Do you think we should accept it, Ma?" Daniel finally asked, breaking the silence. Maria looked at her son, her expression conflicted. "It's a lot, Daniel. Too much, maybe. I don't know if we should." "But he meant it," Daniel said thoughtfully. "He wasn't just trying to make himself feel better. He was sincere." Maria sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I've never been one to take charity, Daniel, but it doesn't feel like charity. It feels like gratitude." Later that afternoon, as if sensing the family's hesitation, Marcus returned to Rosewood Lane, this time alone. Gone was the commanding businessman in a tailored suit. Marcus arrived in simple attire, his expression kind but determined. Daniel opened the door, surprised to see the man standing there again. "May I come in?" Marcus asked politely. Daniel nodded, stepping aside. Maria greeted Marcus hesitantly, offering him a seat at their modest dining table. Maya peeked out from behind a chair, her wide eyes fixed on their guest. Marcus placed a small, leather-bound folder on the table, his voice calm but resolute. "I wanted to speak with you all again because I understand how overwhelming this must feel. But I want you to know that what I'm offering isn't just about gratitude. It's about respect." Maria tilted her head, her expression softening. "Respect," Marcus nodded. "Your son saved my child's life. That's something I can never truly repay. But it's something I'll never forget. What I can do, though, is try to make a difference for you and your family, just as your son made a difference for mine." Maria glanced at Daniel, who sat quietly, listening intently. "Mr. Belmont, we're grateful for your generosity, but it's more than we ever imagined. It feels like too much." "It's not too much," Marcus replied firmly. "It's what your family deserves. Your son showed a level of bravery and kindness that few people, regardless of their circumstances, ever do. If anyone deserves security and opportunity, it's him. And it's all of you." Daniel, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "I didn't help Ethan because I wanted something in return. I helped him because it was the right thing to do." Marcus's expression softened, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And that's exactly why you deserve this." The room fell silent as Marcus opened the folder, revealing the finalized property documents. "This is for you," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "It's not just a house, it's a fresh start, a place where your family can feel safe and secure." Daniel stared at the documents, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for them. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Marcus replied. "Just promise me you'll use this as a foundation for the incredible future I know you're capable of building." Maria's eyes glistened with tears as she placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We'll honor this gift," she said softly. "Thank you, Mr. Belmont. Truly." Marcus shook his head. "Please call me Marcus, and the thanks go to Daniel. Without him, I don't know what I would have done." Maya, who had been watching silently, suddenly piped up. "Does this mean we get to have a backyard?" The adults laughed, the tension in the room easing. Marcus turned to Maya with a warm smile. "Yes, Maya, and maybe even a swing set if your brother approves." Over the next few weeks, the connection between the Belmonts and Daniel's family deepened. True to his word, Marcus didn't simply deliver the property papers and walk away. He invited Daniel and his family to visit Belmont Estate, opening the doors to a world Daniel had never experienced. Ethan was thrilled to see Daniel again, and the two boys quickly became inseparable. They spent their afternoons exploring the sprawling gardens, playing games, and sharing stories about their vastly different lives. For Ethan, Daniel was more than just a friend. He was a mentor, someone who inspired him to see beyond his sheltered world. Marcus, meanwhile, took a keen interest in Daniel's aspirations. During one of their visits, Marcus noticed Daniel sketching quietly on the patio. Intrigued, he sat down beside him. "What are you working on?" he asked. Daniel hesitated before showing Marcus the sketch, a blueprint for a community center complete with classrooms, a playground, and green spaces. "It's just an idea," Daniel said shyly. "Something I'd like to build one day." Marcus studied the drawing, his admiration evident. "It's not just an idea, Daniel. It's a vision, and it's a good one." Over the following weeks, Marcus began mentoring Daniel, introducing him to architects, engineers, and other professionals who could help him refine his skills. He even arranged for Daniel to attend a summer program at a prestigious design school, covering all expenses to ensure Daniel could focus solely on his passion. At the same time, Maria and Maya adjusted to their new home, which quickly became a gathering place for neighbors and friends. Maria continued her seamstress work, but with newfound stability, she began exploring ways to grow her business. Maya, now with a backyard to play in, spent her days chasing butterflies and inventing games, her laughter filling the air like a song. The relationship between the two families flourished, transcending the social and economic barriers that had once separated them. Marcus learned as much from Daniel and his family as they did from him, their humility and resilience inspiring him to reevaluate his own priorities. For Daniel, the experience was transformative. He saw firsthand that kindness could bridge even the widest divides, creating connections that went far beyond material wealth. His bond with Ethan deepened, and their friendship became a symbol of hope, a reminder that, no matter how different their worlds might seem, they were stronger together. As Daniel's family settled into their new life, the gift of a home became more than just a physical space. It became a foundation for growth, a testament to the power of gratitude, and a promise of brighter days ahead. Marcus, too, found himself changed by the experience. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond his business empire. Inspired by Daniel's story, he launched a series of community initiatives, funding scholarships, mentorship programs, and development projects aimed at uplifting underprivileged youth. And so, through an act of courage, a gesture of gratitude, and a bond forged in the unlikeliest of circumstances, two families found themselves forever intertwined. The move to their new home marked a profound turning point for Daniel and his family. For years, they had lived with uncertainty, wondering if the roof over their heads would hold through the next storm, or if there would be enough food for the week. Now, standing in their spacious, sturdy new home, they felt a wave of relief that was almost overwhelming. For the first time, they could imagine a future free from the constant weight of struggle. Maria began to thrive almost immediately. The stress that had etched lines into her face seemed to melt away as she settled into the home's warmth and security. She expanded her sewing business, transforming one of the spare rooms into a small workshop where she could take on more orders and teach sewing classes to women in the neighborhood. Her laughter, once rare and fleeting, now filled the house, a reflection of her renewed hope. Maya, wide-eyed and brimming with excitement, took full advantage of their new surroundings. She played in the backyard until the sun dipped below the horizon, her laughter carrying through the neighborhood like music. She made friends easily, inviting them over to share in her newfound joy. For Maya, this home wasn't just a place to live, it was a place to dream. For Daniel, the change was equally transformative. No longer burdened by the instability of their old life, he focused fully on his education and his passion for architecture. His sketchbook, once a collection of hopeful ideas, now brimmed with detailed plans for community projects and buildings that could inspire and uplift. Under Marcus's mentorship, Daniel learned about the practicalities of bringing his designs to life. He attended workshops and met professionals in the field, each experience reinforcing his belief that he could make a real impact on the world. For Marcus Belmont, the experience of meeting Daniel and his family was life-changing in its own way. A man who had spent decades focused on wealth and power, Marcus found himself humbled by Daniel's courage and selflessness. It forced him to confront the disconnect between his own privileged existence and the struggles of so many others. Determined to make a difference, Marcus began to use his resources to uplift the community. He funded scholarships for underprivileged youth, launched initiatives to improve housing in neighborhoods like Hillside Heights, and supported local businesses run by hard-working families. For Marcus, these efforts weren't about repairing his reputation, they were about honoring the boy who had reminded him of the power of kindness and connection. At home, Marcus also grew closer to Ethan. The experience had made him reevaluate his priorities, and he made a concerted effort to be more present in his son's life. Together, they worked on small projects and shared quiet moments that strengthened their bond. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like a father in more than just name. On a bright afternoon, Daniel and Ethan sat in the Belmont garden, their heads bent over a blueprint spread across the table. The design was for a community center, a project Daniel had envisioned for years, but was now finally able to bring to life with Marcus's support. Ethan chimed in with ideas, his enthusiasm contagious as they discussed the plans. Nearby, Maria and Marcus watched the boys with quiet pride. "It's amazing how far they've come," Maria said, her voice soft with emotion. "They've taught us as much as we've taught them," Marcus replied. His expression was thoughtful, his gaze fixed on Daniel. "That boy saved more than my son's life. He reminded me of what truly matters." As the sun began to set, Marcus walked over to Daniel and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've got something special here," he said, gesturing to the blueprint, "and I'm proud to help you make it happen." Daniel looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Belmont, for everything." Marcus smiled warmly. "You saved my son's life. Now, let me help you build yours." As the two families shared a quiet moment together, the lines that once divided them seemed to blur completely. In their place was a bond forged by kindness, courage, and a shared vision for the future. Together, they had proven that no divide, whether of wealth, status, or circumstance, was insurmountable when met with compassion and understanding.